What if the biggest opportunities in life aren't hidden from you, but simply invisible because you're looking the same way everyone else is? Think about it. Every day, millions of people walk through the same streets, work in the same industries, and face the same problem. Yet a few individuals see something completely different. They notice possibilities others miss. They ask questions nobody else asks. And suddenly they create ideas that change industries, shape cultures, or even save lives. The difference isn't intelligence, it's perspective. Shh. Most people believe creativity is about inventing something entirely new. But the truth is far simpler and far more powerful. Creativity is about connections. It's about taking two ordinary ideas and combining them in a way nobody else thought of before. That's when something remarkable happens. 1 plus 1 stops equaling 2. It begins equaling 3. History is filled with examples of this kind of thinking. A man planning a ski holiday cancels his trip and instead rescues hundreds of children from danger, quietly changing the course of hundreds of lives. An entrepreneur looks at a crowded music industry and asks a simple question, what aren't they doing? And builds an empire by discovering talent before anyone else notices it. A military officer pauses during a moment of panic and questions what a computer system tells him, preventing a catastrophe that could have changed the entire world. None of these moments came from following the obvious path. They came from questioning it. Creative thinkers see systems differently. When everyone else is improving the same process, they ask why the process exists in the first place. When everyone is competing in the same space, they step sideways and create a new space altogether. Sometimes the change is incredibly small. A simple adjustment to the way choices are presented can influence behavior without forcing anyone to change. A shift in timing can win a competition before it even begins. A change in context can transform something ordinary into something extraordinary. A world-class violinist playing beautiful music may be ignored in a subway station, yet celebrated in a concert hall. The music hasn't changed. The context has. That's how powerful perception is. And once you start noticing it, you realize something important. Opportunities are rarely about inventing something completely new. More often, they appear when someone connects existing ideas in a fresh way, questions an assumption everyone else accepts, or looks at a problem from the opposite direction. But there is one final ingredient that makes all of this possible: courage, because thinking differently often means risking embarrassment. It means stepping outside the comfort of the crowd and trying something uncertain. Most people hesitate because they fear looking foolish. Yet the real danger isn't embarrassment, it's regret. The regret of seeing an opportunity and letting it pass because it felt uncomfortable to act. Creative thinkers understand this. They collect ideas, explore perspectives, and remain endlessly curious about the world around them. They notice patterns others overlook and connections others never make. And when those connections collide, something unexpected happens. Two ordinary ideas combine, and the result becomes far greater than anyone predicted. 1 plus 1 no longer equals 2. 1 plus 1 equals 3. Let me start with a simple question. Why do some people see opportunities everywhere while others walk past them every day? The world is the same for everyone. The information is the same. The resources are often the same. Yet the results are completely different. Some people create ideas that change industries, while others work just as hard, just as long, and produce nothing remarkable. The difference is not intelligence. It is not talent. The real difference is how people think. Most people believe creativity is something mysterious, something only a few gifted people possess. But creativity is actually very simple. Creativity is about connections. It is the ability to take two things that already exist and combine them in a way nobody else has noticed before. That is where new ideas come from. Nothing appears from thin air. Everything comes from combining existing pieces in a new way. Steve Jobs once explained that creativity is simply connecting things. The people who appear creative usually have more experiences, more observations, and more curiosity about the world. They collect more dots. And when you have more dots, you have more possibilities to connect them. The problem is that most people spend their lives collecting the same kind of dots. They study one subject, work in one industry, read the same kind of books, and talk to the same kind of people. When your world becomes narrow, your thinking becomes narrow as well. Your ideas become predictable, safe, and ordinary. Safe ideas rarely change anything. But every now and then someone sees the world differently. Someone notices something everyone else overlooked. Someone asks a question nobody else thought to ask. And suddenly, the result is unexpected. Suddenly, 1 plus 1 equals 3. Not because mathematics changed, but because the thinking changed. There is a powerful story that illustrates this perfectly. Many years ago, a man named Nicholas Winton was planning a skiing holiday in Switzerland. It was an ordinary plan, nothing remarkable. But events in Europe suddenly changed everything. Violence erupted across Germany and surrounding countries. Jewish families were attacked, homes were destroyed, businesses burned, and thousands of people were arrested. Most people saw the news and felt helpless. They believed there was nothing they could do. Nicholas Winton chose a different response. Instead of going skiing, he canceled his holiday and traveled to Prague. What he saw there was heartbreaking. Families were desperate to save their children. They knew the Nazis would soon invade, and they understood what that meant. The British government had allowed Jewish children to enter the country, but there were strict conditions. Each child needed paperwork, transport money, and a family in Britain willing to take them in. The system was complicated and slow. Nicholas Winton decided to act. He set up a small office in the dining room of his hotel. There was no organization behind him and no government support. Just one man with determination, a typewriter, and lists of names. Day after day, he worked to arrange homes, organize trains, raise money, and convince officials. Slowly, children began leaving Prague for safety in Britain. One train at a time, hundreds of children escaped a terrible fate. In total, Nicholas Winton saved the lives of 669 children. What makes the story even more extraordinary is that he never spoke about it. Not to his friends, not to the public, not even to his own wife. 50 years later, his wife discovered a scrapbook in their attic. Inside were lists of children, photographs, and documents connected to the rescue effort. That discovery eventually led to a television program where Nicholas Winton was invited to sit in the audience. During the show, the host told the story of the man who had rescued hundreds of children during the war. Then she introduced the woman sitting next to him. She was one of the children he had saved. She thanked him with tears in her eyes. Then the host asked a question to the audience. She asked if anyone else there owed their life to Nicholas Winton. Something incredible happened. People began standing up all over the theater. Men and women, now grown adults with families and grandchildren of their own, stood one after another. The entire audience was filled with people whose lives existed because one man decided to act when others hesitated. In that moment, Nicholas Winton realized something profound. People often focus on what they failed to do in life, but what truly matters is what they actually did. This lesson applies to creativity as well. Creativity often begins with a simple decision, the decision to act. The decision to try something unusual. The decision to speak up even when it feels uncomfortable. Most people stay silent because they fear embarrassment. They worry about what others will think. There is something far worse than embarrassment, regret. Regret is what happens when we realize we had an opportunity and chose not to act. Creative thinkers understand this. They accept the risk of embarrassment because they know regret lasts much longer. Another powerful example of this kind of thinking comes from the music industry. David Geffen started his career with almost no experience. He had no special skills and no prestigious education. But he noticed something that everyone else in the industry ignored. Talent agents were all competing for the same famous artists. The biggest stars attracted the biggest agents. Competition was intense and expensive. Geffen asked himself a simple question. What aren't they doing? He realized no one was looking for talent before it became famous. So instead of chasing established stars, he went to small clubs and bars where unknown musicians were performing. He signed artists before anyone else recognized their potential. Those artists later became legends, including the Eagles, Joni Mitchell, Tom Waits, and Elton John. Geffen eventually built a business empire worth billions of dollars. He didn't succeed by being stronger or smarter than everyone else. He succeeded by asking a different question. What are other people not doing? There is another story that shows how powerful thinking differently can be. In 1983, the world nearly faced a nuclear disaster. A Soviet early warning system suddenly reported that missiles had been launched from the United States. The alarms began sounding. The computer system detected not one missile, but several. According to protocol, the Soviet Union needed to launch its own nuclear response immediately. The officer in charge that night was Stanislav Petrov. The computer insisted the attack was real. His orders were clear. He was supposed to report the attack so that retaliation could begin. But Petrov paused. He asked himself a simple question. If the United States were launching a full nuclear attack, would they send only a few missiles? It didn't make sense. So he made a decision that required enormous courage. He ignored the computer system and waited. Later, it was discovered that the warning system had malfunctioned. Sunlight reflecting off clouds had fooled the satellites into detecting non-existent missiles. If Petrov had followed the instructions exactly, the Soviet Union might have launched a nuclear counterattack. His decision likely prevented a global catastrophe. The lesson here is powerful. Technology is useful, systems are useful, and rules are useful, but none of them replace human thinking. Computers follow instructions. Creative thinkers question them. And this is where the idea that 1 + 1 = 3 becomes important. In mathematics, 1 + 1 = 2. But in creativity, the result can be far greater than the sum of its parts. When ideas connect in unexpected ways, something new emerges, a new perspective appears, a new solution becomes possible. That is how innovation happens. That is how industries change. That is how opportunities appear where others see nothing at all. And the first step is simple. Be curious, look at what everyone else is doing, and then ask a different question. What are they not doing? Because sometimes the greatest opportunities in the world are hiding in the places nobody else thinks to look. Now let's explore something even more powerful than creativity. The ability to influence behavior without forcing anyone to do anything. Most people believe the way to change behavior is through rules, pressure, or persuasion. They think if you explain something clearly enough or repeat it often enough, people will eventually do the right thing. But real life doesn't work like that. People rarely change because they are told to. They change because the situation around them changes. And this brings us to a concept that quietly shapes almost every decision we make, the architecture of choice. Choice architecture is simply the way options are presented to people. The structure of choices influences what people decide to do, often without them even realizing it. Let me give you a simple example. At a school in America, teenage girls had discovered lipstick. Every day they would go into the school bathrooms, apply lipstick, and then kiss the mirror, leaving bright marks all over the glass. The cleaning staff had to scrub the mirrors constantly. The head teacher tried the obvious solution first. She told the girls to stop. Of course, they ignored her. So she tried something different. She gathered the girls in the bathroom for a demonstration. She explained that cleaning lipstick marks took a lot of effort and asked the janitor to show them how the mirrors were cleaned. The janitor dipped a mop into the toilet, squeezed out the water, and then used the mop to clean the mirror. He repeated the process again, dipping the mop back into the toilet water before wiping the glass. From that day on, the lipstick marks disappeared. The girls were still free to kiss the mirror if they wanted. No rule had changed, but the situation around the choice had changed. Suddenly, the mirror was no longer an attractive place to leave a lipstick mark. That is choice architecture. Instead of forcing people to behave differently, you redesign the environment so that the preferred behavior becomes the natural choice. You see the same idea everywhere once you start looking for it. The National Portrait Gallery in London once had a problem. Most visitors crowded the ground floor while the upper floors remained nearly empty. People simply didn't want to climb several flights of stairs. The gallery could have installed signs encouraging visitors to explore the upper floors. They could have made announcements or asked staff to guide visitors upstairs. Instead, they changed the architecture of the experience. They placed an escalator right at the entrance that took visitors directly to the top floor. From there, visitors naturally walked down through the galleries until they reached the exit on the ground floor. The same people who refused to climb stairs were perfectly happy to walk down them. Nothing about the visitors changed. Only the structure of the environment changed. This principle is incredibly powerful because it works with human nature instead of fighting against it. Another clever example came from a small village dealing with a litter problem. Children were constantly throwing candy wrappers and snack packets onto the streets. The local shopkeeper didn't shout at them. He didn't put up warning signs or threaten punishment. Instead, he wrote the child's name on the snack packet when they bought it. Suddenly, the wrapper lying in the street wasn't anonymous anymore. Everyone could see who had dropped it. The litter problem disappeared almost overnight. Again, no rule had changed. The children were still free to throw the wrapper away anywhere they liked. But the architecture of the choice had changed. Now the social consequences were visible. The same thinking can even change lives. In Brazil, prisons faced a major challenge. Overcrowding was severe, and many prisoners returned to crime after their release. Simply locking people away was not solving the problem. So the government introduced an unusual program called Redemption Through Reading. Prisoners could reduce their sentence by reading books. For every book they finished, they earned 4 days off their prison time. They had to write an essay proving they understood the material, but the reward was clear. Up to 12 books per year could be counted. That meant prisoners could reduce their sentence by several weeks each year simply by reading. At first glance, the program seems like a small incentive. But something deeper happens when people start reading regularly. They discover new ideas, new perspectives, and new possibilities beyond the life they previously knew. Reading expands their mental world. Many prisoners who participated in the program left prison with a completely different outlook on life. Some even became writers themselves. The key insight here is that behavior rarely changes through punishment alone. It changes when people are given a better path forward. Choice architecture doesn't remove freedom. It preserves freedom while gently guiding decisions. Another brilliant example comes from the streets of America. A beggar once sat on the sidewalk with several bowls in front of him. Each bowl had a label: Christian, Muslim, Jewish, Hindu, Buddhist, atheist, and agnostic. Beside the bowls was a sign that read, "Which religion cares most about the homeless?" People walking past could see which bowl had the most money. Suddenly, giving a small donation became a way to represent one's beliefs. Each coin was not just charity, it was a vote. The beggar had turned a simple request for money into a competition between belief systems. Instead of asking for sympathy, he tapped into something stronger: identity. By understanding what motivated his audience, he dramatically increased the amount of money people were willing to give. This is another key principle of creative thinking. Stop focusing on what you want. Start focusing on what your audience wants. In advertising, in business, and in life, success often depends on understanding the motivations of others. When you align your idea with what people already care about, the idea becomes far more powerful. There is also a lesson here about timing. A flower shop owner once noticed that many customers ordered flowers for Valentine's Day every year. The problem was that most men left the order until the last minute. They forgot, panicked, and called whatever florist they could find. Instead of waiting for the phone to ring, the florist called customers a week before Valentine's Day. The conversation was simple. Last year you ordered flowers for Valentine's Day. Would you like us to arrange them again this year? The customer was relieved. The florist secured the order early. The shop knew exactly how many flowers to prepare. Competitors were eliminated before they even had a chance to speak to the customer. This is strategic thinking at its best. Instead of competing harder, the florist changed the timing of the competition. By acting first, the game was already won. And this is the deeper lesson of creative thinking. You don't always have to fight harder. Sometimes the smartest move is to change the situation entirely. Change the structure, change the timing, change the context. Because when you change the environment around a decision, people often make the choice you hoped for all along. And that is when something extraordinary begins to happen. Small adjustments in thinking start producing disproportionate results. One small idea combines with another. One opportunity connects with another. And before long, the outcome becomes greater than anyone expected. That is when 1 + 1 stops equaling 2 and starts equaling 3. Think about this for a moment. Most people believe the biggest obstacle to success is lack of resources. They think they need more money, more education, more connections, more support. But again and again, history shows that the real limitation is rarely resource. The real limitation is thinking, not intelligence, not effort, thinking. Because when people stop questioning the way things are done, they begin following systems blindly. They follow procedures, rules, traditions, and habits without asking whether those systems actually make sense anymore. And that is where creativity disappears. There is an important difference between following the letter of a rule and understanding the spirit of a rule. The letter of the rule tells you exactly what the rule says. The spirit of the rule tells you why the rule exists in the first place. When people forget the purpose behind the rule, the system stops serving people, and people start serving the system. Let me show you what that means with a real story. In the 19th century, London was growing faster than anyone had ever imagined. The population doubled in a short period of time. Streets were overcrowded, houses were packed together, and the infrastructure simply wasn't designed to handle that many people. At the time, every house had a cesspit for waste. There were no modern sewage systems. As the population grew, the pits overflowed. Waste leaked into the streets, into basements, and eventually into the Thames River. The same river that supplied the city's drinking water. It didn't take long before disease began spreading through the city. Cholera outbreaks killed tens of thousands of people. Eventually, the situation became unbearable. The smell from the river became so strong that the British Parliament itself could barely function. Curtains had to be soaked in chemicals just to reduce the odor. Finally, the government decided something had to be done. A civil engineer named Joseph Bazalgette was given the responsibility of solving the problem. His task was enormous. He needed to design a sewer system capable of carrying waste away from millions of people. Bazalgette carefully calculated how large the sewer tunnels needed to be to handle the city's waste, and then he did something unusual. He doubled the size. Instead of building the system to meet the minimum requirement, he built it far larger than necessary. At the time, some people thought he was wasting money, but Bazalgette understood something many planners ignore. Cities grow. Technology changes, populations expand. If you build only for the present, the system will fail in the future. Over 100 years later, when London built massive high-rise apartment buildings, those same Victorian sewers were still capable of handling the increased demand. Because Bazalgette had planned beyond the obvious. He wasn't trying to meet the minimum requirement. He was solving the real problem. This is an example of thinking beyond the letter of the rule. Now consider another story about rules and systems. There was once a group of people who regularly met in private homes to participate in extreme forms of consensual behavior. Everyone involved agreed to it. No one was being forced. They were adults making their own choices. However, when the police discovered these meetings, the participants were arrested. Why? Because the law defines certain actions as assault. Even though everyone involved had consented, the legal system focused on the letter of the law rather than the purpose behind it. The original intention of assault laws was to protect people from harm and abuse. But by applying the law mechanically, the system punished people who were not being harmed against their will. The law designed to protect freedom ended up restricting it. That is what happens when systems lose sight of their purpose. Rules become rigid. Thinking disappears, creativity vanishes. This same pattern happens in organizations all the time. Companies create processes to improve efficiency. Over time, those processes become rigid procedures. Employees stop questioning them. Eventually, the procedures slow down progress instead of supporting it. The system becomes more important than the outcome, and when that happens, innovation stops. There is another fascinating example of how blindly following behavior can lead to disaster. A small passenger plane was once flying in Africa with about 20 people on board. Everything about the flight was normal. The aircraft was functioning properly, the weather was clear, and the pilots were experienced. Yet the plane suddenly crashed during landing. Investigators were completely confused. There was no mechanical failure, no storm, no navigation error. Then they interviewed the single surviving passenger. He explained something no one expected. Another passenger had secretly brought a young crocodile onto the plane inside a duffel bag. As the aircraft began its descent, the the crocodile escaped. The flight attendant ran toward the cockpit to warn the pilots. Passengers saw her running and panicked. They rushed forward toward the front of the aircraft. The sudden shift in weight caused the plane to tilt downward. With all the passengers crowded in the front aisle, the pilots couldn't regain control. The aircraft plunged into the ground. The crocodile itself was small and not particularly dangerous. The real cause of the disaster was herd behavior. People reacted without thinking. They copied what others were doing instead of assessing the situation themselves. Herd mentality is incredibly powerful. Humans evolved in groups. For most of history, survival depended on staying with a group. If everyone ran, you ran too. If everyone stopped, you stopped. But in modern situations, this instinct can lead to terrible decisions. Markets crash because people panic. Trends spread because people imitate each other. Ideas become popular not because they are correct, but because they are repeated often enough. Creative thinking requires the opposite behavior. It requires stepping outside the herd. It requires questioning what everyone else accepts as normal. And that can feel uncomfortable because humans fear being different. But every major breakthrough comes from someone who refused to follow the crowd. There is a perfect example of this in the world of literature. A man named John Kennedy Toole wrote a novel called A Confederacy of Dunces. It was unusual, unconventional, and unlike anything publishers were used to seeing. He sent the manuscript to publishers across the country. Every one of them rejected it. Editors believed the book had no clear structure and no commercial value. After years of rejection, the author became depressed. Eventually, he took his own life. Years later, his mother discovered the manuscript and began trying to get it published. Publisher after publisher rejected it again. Finally, one writer agreed to read it. At first, he expected to dismiss it quickly. But as he continued reading, something surprising happened. He realized the book was brilliant. Eventually, the novel was published. The following year, it won the Pulitzer Prize. Today, it is considered one of the greatest works of American literature. The lesson is simple but powerful. Original ideas often look strange at first. They don't fit established categories. They challenge existing assumptions. And because of that, many people reject them before they have a chance to prove themselves. Creativity requires the courage to continue anyway, to question systems, to challenge conventions, to ignore the comfortable safety of the herd. Because when you start thinking independently, new possibilities appear. You begin to see connections others overlook. You begin to notice opportunities others dismiss. And once again, something unexpected happens. Two ordinary ideas connect in an extraordinary way. 1 + 1 stops equaling 2 and starts equaling 3. Let's talk about something that quietly controls far more of our lives than we realize. Context. The environment around an idea often matters more than the idea itself. Most people assume that if something is good, people will automatically recognize its value. But that's rarely how the world works. The same idea can look brilliant in one context and completely useless in another. Change the context and suddenly everything changes. There is a fascinating example of this from the world of art. A violinist named Joshua Bell once conducted a small experiment. Bell is one of the greatest violinists in the world. When he performs in concert halls, tickets can cost hundreds of dollars and sell out quickly. One morning, he stood inside a busy subway station in Washington, D.C., wearing ordinary clothes and holding a violin case. He began playing some of the most difficult and beautiful music ever written, including pieces by Bach that normally bring audiences to silence in concert halls. Thousands of people passed through that station on their way to work. Almost no one stopped. Some dropped a coin into his case without even looking up. Most walked past without noticing him at all. After 45 minutes of extraordinary music, Joshua Bell had earned only a few dollars. Nothing about the music had changed. Nothing about the musician had changed. The only thing that changed was the context. Inside a concert hall, people expected brilliance. Inside a subway station, they expected background noise. And that expectation shaped what they noticed. This is why creative thinkers pay close attention to the environment surrounding an idea. They understand that people don't just react to the idea itself. They react to the situation around it. Advertising is full of examples of this principle. There was once a car manufacturer struggling to sell a particular model. The vehicle itself was good. Reviews were positive. But sales were disappointing. The company tried the usual approach. More advertising, bigger promotions, discounts. Nothing worked. Finally, someone asked a different question. Instead of asking, "How do we sell this car?" they asked, "Where should people experience this car?" The company began placing the vehicles in airports for rental customers. Travelers arriving in unfamiliar cities often rented cars at the airport. Suddenly, people who had never considered buying that model were driving it for several days. They experienced the comfort, the handling, the features. Sales increased dramatically. The car hadn't changed. The context had. This same principle explains why many brilliant ideas initially fail. Not because the idea is bad, but because the environment isn't ready for it. Timing matters, context matters, perception matters. Another remarkable story comes from the world of crime prevention. In New York City during the 1980s and early 1990s, crime rates were extremely high. Violence, theft, and vandalism were widespread. The police tried many strategies, but the problem remained. Then a theory called the broken windows theory began influencing city policy. The idea was simple. When small signs of disorder appear in a neighborhood, broken windows, graffiti, litter, they send a message that nobody is in control. When people believe nobody is in control, more disorder follows. But if the environment looks cared for, orderly, and monitored, people behave differently. So the city began focusing on small things, cleaning graffiti from subway trains, repairing broken windows quickly, enforcing minor rules that had previously been ignored. Over time, something interesting happened. Serious crime began to drop because the environment signaled that rules mattered. Again, behavior changed because context changed. Creative thinkers constantly look for ways to reshape context because changing the environment is often easier than changing people. There is also a powerful lesson here about how ideas spread. Consider how trends move through society. At first, an idea appears unusual. Engineers kept trying to improve the machines used to clean the equipment. Bigger machines, stronger chemicals, more powerful processes. But one engineer asked a different question. Instead of asking, "How do we clean the equipment better?" he asked, "Why are we cleaning it in the first place?" The answer was simple. The equipment became dirty because grease and residue built up during operation. So he asked another question. What if we prevent the buildup instead of cleaning it later? That change in thinking led to new materials and coatings that prevented grease from sticking to surfaces in the first place. Suddenly, the entire cleaning process became unnecessary. Instead of improving the cleaning process, they eliminated the need for cleaning altogether. That is the power of questioning assumptions. Many problems exist only because people accept the original structure of the problem. Change the structure and the problem disappears. Another example comes from the world of advertising. A company once approached an agency because they were struggling to sell their product. It was a small portable radio designed for young people. The problem was that portable radios already existed. The market was crowded, and competitors had bigger budgets. The obvious strategy would have been to talk about sound quality, durability, or price. Instead, the agency looked at the situation differently. They realized that teenagers didn't buy radios because of technical features. Teenagers bought things that helped them express identity. So instead of advertising the radio itself, the campaign focused on freedom. The radio became something you carried to the beach, to parks, to street corners with friends. It represented independence, music, youth, and rebellion against boring adult routines. The product hadn't changed, but the meaning of the product had. Sales exploded because the campaign stopped focusing on the product and started focusing on the emotion behind it. That shift from product thinking to human thinking is one of the most powerful moves in creativity. People rarely buy things because of logic. They buy things because of meaning. Meaning connects ideas to emotions, and emotions drive action. There is also an important lesson here about simplicity. Many people assume creative ideas must be complicated. They imagine creativity as something complex and mysterious. But the most powerful ideas are often extremely simple. In fact, simplicity is often what makes an idea powerful. Consider one of the most famous advertising campaigns ever created, a Think Small. At the time, American car advertisements all followed the same pattern. Big cars, big promises, big claims. Bigger was always presented as better. Then Volkswagen introduced a tiny car called the Beetle. Instead of pretending the car was large and powerful, the advertisement embraced the opposite idea. Think small. The message was honest, simple, and unexpected. While every other car advertisement shouted loudly about size and power, this campaign quietly celebrated being different. And because it was so different, people noticed. The campaign became legendary and helped turn the Volkswagen Beetle into one of the most successful cars in history. The lesson is clear. Creativity is not always about adding more. Sometimes it is about removing everything unnecessary until the core idea becomes clear. Another story illustrates this beautifully. A prison once faced a serious problem. Prisoners constantly tried to smuggle contraband items into their cells. Guards searched visitors, inspected packages, and monitored every movement. Yet the problem continued. The prison authorities kept adding more security measures, more guards, more inspections, more restrictions. But one officer suggested something unexpected. Instead of focusing only on preventing smuggling, why not change the prisoners' incentive? The prison introduced programs where inmates could earn privileges through education, work, and good behavior. Access to books, extra phone calls, additional family visits. Gradually, something interesting happened. The prisoners began protecting those privileges. Smuggling decreased because prisoners themselves didn't want to risk losing what they had earned. The system changed from punishment to motivation. And once again, the problem was solved not by adding more force, but by changing the structure of the situation. Creative thinking often works like that. It reveals solutions hiding in plain sight. But those solutions only appear when we step back and question the original assumptions. This kind of thinking also plays a powerful role in financial success. Many people believe wealth comes only from working harder. But in reality, wealth often comes from thinking differently about how value is created. Some entrepreneurs focus on improving existing products slightly. Others step back and ask a more powerful question. Well, what if we change the entire model? Netflix did not compete with video rental stores by building bigger stores. They eliminated stores entirely. Uber did not compete with taxi companies by buying more taxis. They changed the way transportation was organized. Airbnb did not compete by building hotels. They changed the way accommodation was distributed. In each case, the winning idea came from questioning the assumptions of the industry. Creative thinkers understand that the biggest opportunities often appear where systems look rigid and permanent. When something seems just the way things are, that is often where innovation begins. Because systems are designed by people, and anything designed by people can be redesigned. But this requires a mindset most people resist. Curiosity. Curiosity about why things exist. Curiosity about how systems work. Curiosity about what might happen if something changed. When curiosity becomes a habit, patterns begin to appear. You start noticing contradictions. You start seeing inefficiencies. You start identifying possibilities hidden inside everyday situations. And suddenly the world looks very different. Problems become opportunities. Constraints become creative challenges. Ordinary ideas combine in unexpected ways. One observation connects with another. One insight leads to another. And eventually something remarkable happens. Two small ideas collide. Two simple thoughts combine, and the result becomes something far greater than either idea alone. Once again, 1 plus 1 stops equaling 2 and begins equaling 3. By now, you may have noticed something. None of the stories we explored were really about advertising, business, or even creativity alone. They were about how people think. Because the difference between ordinary results and extraordinary ones rarely comes from working harder. It comes from seeing differently. Most people live inside invisible boundaries, not physical boundaries, mental ones. Rules they never question, systems they assume cannot change. Habits they follow because everyone else follows them. And slowly those invisible boundaries become cages. People stop experimenting, stop questioning. Stop noticing opportunities sitting right in front of them, but creative thinkers behave differently. They look at the same world everyone else sees, yet they ask slightly different questions. Why is it done this way? What assumption is hiding here? What would happen if we changed the situation? Those questions sound simple, but they unlock powerful possibilities. Because once you begin questioning assumptions, something interesting happens. The world stops looking fixed. It starts looking flexible. Problems become puzzles. Limitations become design challenges. And suddenly you begin seeing opportunities hidden inside everyday situations. Let me tell you one final story that captures this perfectly. During World War II, Allied bombers were suffering heavy losses. Aircraft returning from missions were covered with bullet holes. Military engineers began analyzing the damage to determine where additional armor should be added. They mapped every bullet hole on the returning aircraft. The wings were full of damage. The fuselage was full of damage. The tail sections were covered with holes. The obvious conclusion seemed clear. Reinforce those areas with stronger armor. But a statistician named Abraham Wald noticed something strange. The planes being analyzed were the ones that survived. Those aircraft had taken damage in those areas and still managed to return safely, which meant something important. The planes that had been hit somewhere else never returned. So Wald suggested reinforcing the areas without bullet holes. The engines, the cockpit, the fuel system. Those were the parts where damage caused the aircraft to crash before reaching base. It was a completely different way of looking at the data. Everyone else was focusing on the obvious evidence. Wald focused on the missing evidence, and that insight saved countless aircraft and lives. This is the essence of creative thinking. Looking at the same information everyone else sees, but asking a different question. Now think about how this idea applies to everyday life. Most people focus on what is visible, the successful company, the popular product, the famous entrepreneur, but they rarely examine what isn't visible, the mistakes avoided, the assumptions challenged, the invisible decisions that changed everything. Success is rarely about a single brilliant idea. More often, it is about connecting small insights over time. One observation leads to another. One adjustment creates another opportunity. One idea combines with another until something larger begins to form. That is where the real power lies. Because when ideas combine in unexpected ways, the result becomes greater than the individual parts. Just like in the stories we explored. A change in context creates a new opportunity. A shift in perspective reveals a hidden solution. A question nobody asked exposes a flaw everyone missed. And suddenly the result is no longer predictable. This is why the title of the idea we've been exploring matters so much. In mathematics, 1 + 1 = 2. The numbers are fixed. The answer is predictable. But in creativity, in business, in life, 1 + 1 can equal 3. Because ideas interact. They multiply. They reinforce each other. A small insight combined with another small insight can produce something unexpectedly powerful. Think about the greatest breakthroughs in history. They rarely came from isolated ideas. They came from connections. Technology combined with design. Art combined with engineering. Psychology combined with marketing. Different worlds colliding to produce something new. And the same principle applies to your own thinking. The more experiences you collect, the more ideas you encounter, the more perspectives you explore, the more connections become possible. Curiosity becomes your greatest advantage because curiosity leads you to places others ignore. And the more dots you collect, the more powerful your combinations become. But there is one final lesson that matters more than anything else. Ideas alone are not enough. Ideas must be acted upon. Remember Nicholas Winton? Hundreds of people knew children were in danger during that terrible period of history, but only one man decided to act. Creative thinking begins with curiosity, but it becomes meaningful only when someone takes action, when someone risks embarrassment, when someone tries something that might fail. Because failure is rarely the real danger. The real danger is doing nothing. The real danger is seeing an opportunity and letting it pass because it feels uncomfortable. Creative thinkers understand this. They know that every breakthrough carries the risk of looking foolish, but they also know something far more important. Embarrassment lasts a moment. Regret lasts a lifetime. So they try, they experiment, they test ideas, and occasionally those ideas combine in unexpected ways. One idea connects with another. A simple insight meets an unusual perspective, and the result becomes something greater than anyone predicted. That is when the magic happens. That is when ordinary thinking transforms into creative thinking. That is when the world begins to open up with possibilities. And that is when the simple equation we all learned in school quietly changes. 1 plus 1 stops equaling 2 and begins equaling 3.